please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome back to RotoWire's signature NHL hockey pod, PuckCast, with Statsman and AJ, brought to you with support from our pals at Owner's Box with their new way to enjoy fantasy sports. Friends, I'm Paul Bruno in Toronto, Ontario, and you can follow me at Statsman22. My co-host is AJ Scholes, who's a great follow at AJ Scholes24, who's based in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, near RotoWire headquarters over there in Madison. Today, I have to bring back a segment that we shelved for the last 2 seasons, partner. Longtime listeners will remember the rant of the week. Well, I'm in full rant mode, as you know from just prepping with me this morning before we even went to air. Consider the following issues of league discipline that we've heard in the past week, AJ, and I know you're familiar with all of them. Tom Wilson got a 7-game suspension for rubbing out Brandon Carlo with a headshot. Alex Chiasson got 1 game for post-game cross-check on Leafs Jimmy Vesey. Alex Ovechkin even got a game for his vicious use of his stick in administering the old separator against an opponent last week, a Bruin player who is going to be doubtful for having children because of the viciousness of that attack, I'll say. But one Bradley Marchand somehow escapes league discipline for a cross-check to the back of the head of a defenseless New Jersey defenseman, Ty Smith. Just look, you folks, just type in Brad Marchand cross-check into your browser to realize how many times this guy's done this, and yet he gets away with it. I don't understand it. How is this possible? Well, for what it's worth, I'm going to give this Bruin winger a distinction today. He goes into the Statsman Blacklist Hall of Fame, partner. Henceforth, this sneaky, dirtiest player in the game goes into hiding and will never be mentioned by me on this podcast ever again. I'm sick and tired of this guy, and he joins a certain Texas Rangers second baseman in that shameful academy of most undistinguished athletes that I have ever witnessed while watching games on TV or in person. AJ, I'm fuming about this guy, and I'm telling you what, I'm glad that he's not in the room with me today right now because it would be fireworks. I don't know if I'd like to leave a mark is what I'm saying, okay?
Well, I mean, so first, let's start with Tom Wilson. I mean, if there's ever a guy that earned a heavy-handed suspension, it's absolutely Tom Wilson. I mean, they talk about, in suspensions, they evaluate, was the head the main point or the first point of contact? That's what the player safety always talks about. In this case, the head was the only point of contact. Tom Wilson deserves everything he got in a 7-game suspension. It should have been longer. You're talking about a guy who has now been suspended 3 times for illegal checks to the head, not to mention 2 other suspensions. In total, you're looking at 30 games lost, about $1.3 million in suspended salary for Tom Wilson. So 7 games is more than generous for him. It should have been more, although I've heard it compared. It probably would have been a 10-game suspension in an 82-game season. But I think it still should have been 10 in this season. Alex Chiasson, for his part, look, I think you're talking about the problem here being end of game, after the game. And that's probably really where the league came down. But this is a guy who's never been fined, never been suspended in his career. So 1 game certainly feels acceptable there. For Alex Ovechkin, look, he was just trying to check out Trent Frederick, make sure he had all of his equipment on, just double checking. It's important that you're properly attired. No, I mean, a fine for the spearing incident. You're talking about a guy who, other than what they're labeled as conduct detrimental to the league, this guy hasn't been suspended or fined since 2012. Those 1-game suspensions coming for skipping the All-Star game a couple of times over a few years. So getting a fine here, end of the day, I'm fine with that one as well. Now, we'll get to the player that shall not be named here. You're looking at a lengthy list of suspensions. He's been suspended for a total of 19 games over his career. I will say this is the first suspension for cross-checking. Never been suspended for that before. He's been suspended for elbowing, spearing, and then clipping 3 different times and 1 other elbowing suspension. So, to be fair, he's never been suspended for cross-checking, Paul. But this is also a guy who probably should have been suspended for licking opponents' kissing opponents, all things that you definitely wouldn't get away with in today's COVID protocol era. That's for sure. I agree with all the suspensions on the other one. I did not see the Brad Marchand cross-check, but I do think he probably gets away with more, and I'm not really sure why. He certainly is deserving of a couple more suspensions for some of his antics, that's for sure.
Well, and so we'll leave it to our listeners to maybe bring them up in their comments, but we'll just say the Boston winger, first-line winger, henceforth, and that's good enough for me, AJ. Well, let's get on with the show. We want to go through the 31 rosters as usual with our roster breakdowns. But before that, we have to give our nod to our friends at Owner's Box, and I defer to my partner here. Take it away, AJ.
Hey, NHL fans. Owner's Box is here to reinvent the way you play fantasy sports this season. Owner's Box is not DFS. They are the first ever weekly fantasy sports platform that combines the best elements of the industry into one product. Owner's Box is a head-to-head elimination-style format that keeps players engaged through live snake drafts, social interactions, and a new layer of strategy that allows you to become the ultimate fantasy GM. The best part about weekly fantasy sports is there's no long-term commitment. Users are able to draft a new team every single day and participate in different types of contests. Keep the fantasy experience fresh and fun so you're never out of the game. Compete with your opponent over 7 days of fierce competition and get paid out weekly. No more falling subject to unfair payouts, as up to 50% of users win money on Owner's Box. Owner's Box also allows users to brand themselves and engage socially across the platform in multiple different ways. Add friends, create custom leagues, and rank up to elevate the trash talk and competition to the next level. Think you have what it takes to be a weekly fantasy guru? Head over to ownersbox.com and start making a name for yourself today. In honor of the NHL season, if you sign up free now, Owner's Box will match your first deposit up to $500. What are you waiting for? Head over to ownersbox.com/RotoWire to claim your bonus and join the new wave of fantasy sports.
All right, partner, this week I get to go first as we wind our way through each NHL roster with lineup and injury notes. And I note that this is also the first week where we didn't have any postponed games, so a full slate of teams to talk about for the first time in our weekly segments here. And I will begin with a look at Anaheim, where they went 1-2-1 last week, and Rickard Rakell led a rather prolific offense with 2 goals and 5 assists. Lundestrom had 3 goals. Troy Terry had 2 goals and 1 helper, but a note on him, he's listed again with a day-to-day injury with an upper body hurt, so keep an eye on his status, because while he has been ticking along, he's had some injury bumps, and he's currently in one situation like that right now. Ryan Getzlaff even chipped in with a couple of goals. He's more of an assist guy, so keep an eye on him and the way he's used on the power play. It's still a significant part of his value in DFS play. Cam Fowler has done a great job carrying the offensive load with a couple of guys on the back end hurt. One of them is not Kevin Shattenkirk. He also chipped in with 3 points last week. But Josh Manson, this guy's been in and out of the lineup lately and got dinged up in yesterday's game. So keep an eye on his status going forward, and note that the load offensively still will fall to Cam Fowler when this team lines up on the power play. In Manson's case, the thinking is that while it's a lower body injury, it's not a recurrence of the abdominal muscle injury that he just came back from, AJ. And I know you're a big fan of John Gibson here, AJ. I know that. But and I am too. I like the fact that this guy has shouldered a lot of the goalie load, but of late he's been struggling a little bit, partner, allowing 3 or more goals against in a string of 9 straight games. And I also add in the fact that only twice has he made 30-plus saves in those contests. So it's not because of a heavy workload. He's just not quite on top of his game as he usually is.
What was surprising for me this last week is that Brendan Goolie ended up on waivers and went unclaimed. You're talking about a 23-year-old defenseman. He was 51st overall selection in 2015. He was part of the Brandon Montour trade with Buffalo and Anaheim doing that deal, and they waived him to move him down to the minors. And I was surprised nobody took a look. He doesn't have a big contract, anything like that. Especially when you consider, the Penguins took Mark Friedman off waivers last week, and he doesn't have, quality player, but he doesn't have nearly the same pedigree as Brendan Goolie. And I was surprised nobody at least took a shot at him. In terms of the Arizona Coyotes, things went a little bit better for them last week. 2-1. Pitlick got 2 goals. Jarmelson with 3 assists. One kind of concerning thing for them is last night Darcy Kemper picked up an injury that would really force them to rely on Antti Ranta. Now, he was perfect in relief last night, so a good outing there. But I think long-term, I'm not convinced he can be a number 1 overall for them. Part of that is his injury history since joining the Coyotes. He's probably, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's got to be close to spending more or as many games on the shelf as he has in action for the Coyotes. So that's a concern for me and something to monitor as we move forward into the rest of this week.
And AJ, I want to mention Nick Hjalmarsson, more noted as a defensive defenseman, and he gives decent value in low-end DFS picks with just by hits and block shots. And you can add the fact that he had 3 assists last week. If he puts together a game where he gets an assist and his usual allotment of hits and block shots, he's in there for a good value play. I know block shots count a lot in DFS, so I think it could be a sneaky good value if he gets a point and a few of those block shots to his resume on a DFS night. So an interesting side option there if you're looking on the defensive side of the puck for value in DFS. The Boston Bruins went 1-1-1 last week. Partner Nick Ritchie has fit in very well in a second scoring line. I like this guy's shots on goal rate of better than 2 per game, and he's looking good there on David Krejci's wing right now. Trent Frederick is also a guy who's getting a little more action. On the depth chart, he lists as the 3rd line left wing. I think there's big things in this guy's future. He gave us a glimpse of that with 2 goals in his last 4 games played. There's a new look on the blue line as well with some shuffling going on there. Jakub Zboril pairs with Charlie McAvoy on the first pairing, and Matt Grzelcyk returned from his injury stint on the second pair, and they've added Jared Tenorti on the 3rd blue line pair. This guy is the son of Mark Tenorti. You won't remember him, AJ, but this guy was an absolute terror on Minnesota's ice way back in the day. One of the toughest fighters I've ever seen in the NHL. And if that talent has gone to Jared Tenorti, you're going to want to watch hockey fights going forward. If they show clips on YouTube of this guy swinging like his dad, it would be something for you to see, because Tenorti Sr. was an animal.
Well, the younger Tenorti certainly stood up, despite being the new guy on the team. Dropped the gloves with Tom Wilson after that hit on Brandon Carlo. So certainly more than willing to square up, that's for sure. So it seems at least, the old man taught him something there in terms of that aspect of the game. Look, Boston's record is a concern for me when you consider their goals allowed per game over that 3-game stretch was just 1 per game. They had some really good goaltending. Just weren't getting anything in the way of offense. In fact, they were the 5th worst offense over the course of last week. What's interesting about that is the names that fall into this category. Paul, you'll have no expectations on this, but number 5, Boston, number 4, Washington at 1.67. Then some usual suspects we expect here: Detroit at 1.5, New Jersey at 1.5. Paul, any guesses as the worst offensive team last week?
Not a hint.
Edmonton Oilers at 1.33 goals per game. So, look, my point is there's a number of teams that have been struggling, so there's plenty of time for Boston to kind of figure this out. But it's certainly a concern heading into the rest of the season. We'll talk about concerning teams, and that's the Buffalo Sabres. 0-4 in their last week, winless in their last 7. You look at their goals for is right at 2. They're one of those worst teams in the league. But perhaps more concerning for them is the other side. They're also tied for last week for the most goals allowed at 4.5. So there's no offense, there's no defense, and ultimately there's no wins in Buffalo. And if things keep going this way any longer, I think the other thing that Buffalo is going to be without is Jack Eichel.
Wow, there's a hot take, and I mean he must be steaming, that poor guy. Looking for this team to finally contend is a pipe dream at the moment here, and they're winless in their last 7, looking really, really hopeless right now. And partner, just so you know, I played dumb there when you said Edmonton. I know it was the Leafs that hamstrung that team three games in a row, and McDavid and Draisaitl didn't even get a point until the 3rd game of that set. So I thank you for leaving the door open for me on that one. Carolina went 4-0 last week in terms of a team that's on the opposite end of the hot and cold scale to Buffalo. They've actually won their last 5 overall. Martin Necas leading the scoring parade with 2 goals and 5 helpers. And in the nets, they've had great goaltending from both Nedeljkovic and Reimer, each of them posting 2 wins and each of them allowing only 4 goals against. So you can help me out. There's not much to choose from between the 2 guys, and that's a great bonus for the coaching staff. They can just close their eyes and say, okay, let's pick you. Spin me around. Let's pick you to start. With Toivo Teravainen out of 8 of the last 9 games, the offense you would have thought was a little bit challenged. He's got an upper body and concussion issues that are going on. There's been a lot of movement here in the roster. Sebastian Aho is now flanked by McGinn and Fogle on a line and stalled between Svechnikov and Fast, but it really hasn't slowed this offense down. They're ticking and bopping away. So really the magic touch is working here. And they're not missing a beat despite a key bump there with Teravainen's status.
Well, and of course, they are missing Paul's favorite defenseman, Jake Gardner, who's dealing with some injury concerns as well. But you're absolutely right. You know, for as long as Peter Mrazek has been sidelined, you would not have expected Carolina to necessarily carry on the way they have been. They're 1 point back of the Lightning for the Central Division lead, you know, which is, I think those 4 spots are going to be a toss-up, if I'm being completely honest. Any one of those teams can move in there. I don't see a lot of challenges from the outside looking in, but we'll get on to some of those teams in a minute. First, let's start at Calgary, who makes the coaching change here during the last week. So they'll have a new man behind the bench in Daryl Sutter. They went 1-2-1 last week. Dylan Dubé, 3 goals, 2 assists. Noah Hannafin, 2 goals over that stretch as well. It'll be interesting to see what the dynamic looks like in terms of line combinations and all that. You know, Sutter's a more old school coach, so don't be surprised to see Milan Lucic getting some more opportunities. A guy that can play rough and tumble there. I definitely expect to see him a little bit more. But they've got Jacob Markstrom fully healthy and ready to go. And I would expect him to kind of eventually, you know, it's been a rough start, a loss and an overtime loss in the first 2 games back. But he'll get back on track here. And I expect him to start piling up a couple of wins. This is a guy that I'm still pegging, despite the time off, to at least reach that 20 win mark here. He's got 12 to go to get there. And I certainly think he will.
Over in Chicago, AJ, Brent Seabrook announced his retirement. His injury woes are now the cause of that early retirement, I'll say, but he gave it all for this franchise, was a big part of their Stanley Cup winning era, and a key partner with Duncan Keith in one of the better offensive pairings and all-around pairings in the NHL during their time together. So a tip of the hat to Brent Seabrook. And a look at a Chicago team that continues to retool on the fly, AJ. I can't believe the rebuild that's gone on here. And it's happened around a big comeback year for Alex DeBrincat. He has really benefited from playing opposite the wing from Patrick Kane. He has 30 points in 22 games. Strong DFS play every time out. Seems to be undervalued a little bit considering the scoring stability that he brings to this team on a nightly basis, but sneaky good value if the people at FanDuel and DraftKings continue to give us a break in that regard. Dylan Strome is one youngster who's not been along for the ride here in terms of the recent success. He's on the IR with concussion issues, and I can't wait to see him get back and healthy and chipping in along with the youth core that surrounds Patrick Kane on this team. It's been one of the more compelling teams to watch in the last little while. Even Malcolm Subban in the nets has turned things around from early season struggles. He, in fact, is challenging Lankinen with appearances in 3 of the last 6 games overall for the club. I'll also throw out another young name that is starting to make a grade here. As a bit of a breakout most recently, and that's Brandon Hagel playing right wing on the second line. He has 4 points in his last 7 games. Might he be the next youngster that fits in on a consistent basis going forward for a team, as I say, that's having a magical rebuilding season on the fly?
Well, and you mentioned that they, are going to potentially get Strome back here at some point. It also sounds like Kirby Dach is heading in the right direction. And boy, would that bolster what I would argue is their weakest position right now at center. I think he for sure slides in as their number 2 center, if not pushing Pius Sutter to be the number 1 guy there, especially as Taves is out. And look, we saw it was literally a matter of probably 10, 15 minutes. They placed Seabrook, Andrew Shaw on IR, long-term IR. And then shortly thereafter, we heard Seabrook's retirement. I can't imagine we're not going to see a similar retirement announcement here for Andrew Shaw with the lingering concussion issues. They basically said they're going to wait until he's starting to feel better from the concussion problems and then evaluate if he can even play again. And I think I would not want to watch Andrew Shaw playing in a game. To be totally honest with you, I don't want to see somebody get another concussion given his history. And so that's hopefully they'll make the right choice. Look, if he's cleared and healthy, it's hard to argue to keep a guy from doing what he loves here. But I certainly think it probably would be best for him to hang up those skates. That's my personal opinion on it. Obviously, he can make the decision for himself. In Columbus, we got a guy coming off the IR in Elvis Merzlikins back on the active roster, and I think this is going to really help them out. Columbus is so much better when they can split the workload between Korpisalo and Merzlikins. Look, last 16 games for Columbus, Korpisalo's appeared in 14 of them. That's just a huge workload for any netminder. And certainly I don't think he's well suited for that. In terms of offense, you got 2 goals, 1 assist from Jenner, same from Werenski. I'm sorry, 2 goals, 1 assist from Jenner, 2 assists from Werenski. And then the team as a collective went 2-1 this last week, a decent run of form. But look, as I mentioned earlier, I just don't know with how good Chicago's been this year. Tampa, Carolina, and Florida, I think, are pretty much locks for how they're playing to make the playoffs. Maybe Columbus could track down Chicago, but I just don't see it at this point, especially when you consider they're going to add back Kirby Dach and Dylan Strome in the coming weeks here. So for me, at this point, I think Columbus is on the outside looking in. Paul, do you have a different take on them as a playoff team?
No, I think I'm right there with you, and they have to be concerned about the lack of performance from Max Domi. He has pointless in his last 8 games overall, AJ. And when you think that Pierre-Luc Dubois went out the door and they got this guy, it doesn't seem like a good deal for Columbus at the moment. The trade-off in terms of the skill level of these players, not that they were 1-for-1 deals or anything like that, but it's just looking for Domi to fill the role that Dubois left behind. It's not happening here. And then on defense, you've got the fact that Werenski's been very slow to chip in offense alongside Seth Jones. He also had some injury issues earlier in the season. He only got 2 assists in his last 6 games played. Those are 2 issues where they're looking at those 2 key players that are not really delivering to keep Columbus closer to the playoff spot hunt that you described. And it's certainly going to help them that Elvis is back in the building there. I had to say that. The Colorado Avalanche, they went 2-1-1 last week, and the enigma known as Nichushkin got 2 goals, 1 assist. We seem to look at this guy in fits and starts. That's what he delivers. But boy, when I look at this guy on the ice, he's got size, he's got speed, he's got a good shot. I just don't know why he's not able to put it all together consistently. But he gave us a glimpse again last week. Brendan Saad was alongside, got 2 goals and 2 assists. And Girard from the back end, I've been touting this guy as a viable scoring option from the blue line, and he delivered last week at 2 goals and 2 assists. Again, he might be the defensive version of Nichushkin up front, that he shows you glimpses and then he goes in hiding for stretches. So guide yourself accordingly in terms of these inconsistent players. And the biggest problem of all is Nate MacKinnon sidelined with an upper body injury, missing the last 2 games and could be out for a few more. That's going to obviously hamper this offense. And boy, those people that were touting this guy as league MVP and betting big bucks on him before the season started have to be disappointed with the uneven start that he's had, largely due to the injury woes that have nagged him so far this season. Nazem Kadri and Yost move up in terms of the depth chart at center. Philip Grubauer continues to shine in the nets under a heavy workload in terms of regular assignments without missing a beat. But there might be a concern here at some point because of the condensed schedule that Colorado's been playing, because he is riding without much support from Hunter Mixa in terms of backup contributions. But I say ride this guy going forward as long as you can, because it's a very deep team in front of him. Still one of the top juggernauts in the entire Western Conference, I'll say.
Well, I certainly have some concerns about this team, and I talked about it last night in a radio spot. Mikko Rantanen was moved over to center last night because they don't have MacKinnon, they don't have Compher, so they have more wingers than they have centers at this point. And that's not a move I love. I don't know that there's a better option. I'll be completely honest. So I do think it's the right choice, but it's not a good choice. It's the right bad choice. Let's put it that way. Because, I don't see how that's going to totally work out for them. And it didn't last night in terms of getting a win. But it does give additional value to Nedeljkovic because he's playing on a top line with Lundestrom and Rantanen. And maybe they can gel and figure something out. But I'm expecting it to be a Band-Aid, if anything. Talks are maybe Nathan MacKinnon could be back Wednesday, possibly. And that would be a big help. There's concerns about this team on the back end, too, with, Cale Makar, Bowen Byram, Connor Timmins, Dennis Gilbert, Erik Johnson, all out to various degrees. So you're looking at a third pairing of, Ryan Graves and Greg Petterin, who was, just recently in the minors. So I don't love the depth there as well. So there's some red flags here, but obviously if they start to get healthy sooner rather than later, I think they'll be perfectly fine. Another team dealing with a couple of injuries is the Dallas Stars. They went 1-2 last week. They still don't have Alexander Radulov, who's been out for a while. John Klingberg missed a couple games due to injury, missed one game for personal reasons. And then, of course, there's, the long-term issue of not having Tyler Seguin or Ben Bishop yet to this point. And so I think some of those cracks are starting to show, but they've had a couple of guys step up in Robertson with 2 goals and 1 assist, Baxa with 2 goals. And, of course, Miro Heiskanen continues to thrive as the number 1 blue liner for them, really a quality defenseman. He does have a few fits and starts here. He had a stretch of 6 games where he only had 1 assist, but you look at his last 3 games, 2 goals, 2 assists. So an up and down player a little bit. You'd like some more consistency from him in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's a consistency that he showed more last year than this year, AJ, and that's a bit of a concern when you add that to the injury woes that this team has had. Heiskanen has been really up and down in terms of his performance, and they need him to be one of the 2 linchpins on the back end to provide offense along with Klingberg to have success on an ongoing basis. But their whole structure is challenged with the number of hurts that you identified. A team that's challenged night in, night out, simply because they're thin on talent overall, is the Detroit Red Wings. They went 0-2 in a limited schedule last week, AJ. But Filip Zadina, at least, has started to show some signs of the offense that was expected of him when they drafted him. He had 2 goals last week, and that makes 4 points in his last 5 games played overall as a right wing on a second scoring line. Bobby Ryan is leading a leader in the attack here, and I think that he's going to be held up as a bargaining chip at the trade deadline for a team that's contending, and it could return some nice future value for the Red Wings after they rehabbed Ryan's career in this environment. So it's a win-win situation for the team and the player going forward, should he depart to greener pastures and return some chips back to the Red Wings. Dylan Larkin's missed the last 4 games, but is back skating. This team really misses their captain. Obviously, you take a guy of this quality out of a thin lineup, it's going to hamper them overall, and it really has. You can see it, but maybe there is some hope on the horizon. For me, though, Mantha is a big disappointment on the right wing here. Anthony Mantha was supposed to be one of their offensive leaders. He's only got 10 points and an ugly -16 as right wing on a top unit with regular minutes and no injuries to speak of. Really an underperformance from a guy that they're looking for big things from.
Well, I'll just dive into Edmonton. I think you covered Detroit pretty well, considering there's not much to talk about there. And it was a rough week for the Oilers. They went 1-2. Russell, really their only big offensive contributor with 3 assists. We talked earlier about how much the offense was struggling. Towards the end, Connor McDavid started to figure it out, a goal and 2 assists. But a tough week for them. But you're going to have this happen from time to time, especially when you're playing the same opponents over and over again. And nothing will improve the fortunes of any of the Canadian teams like a couple of games against the Senators. It'll help every offense get better and every defense look that much stouter. The one lingering concern I have is Mikko Koskinen. He had 1 outing over that stretch last week, was shelled to the tune of 3 goals on 10 shots. and really has underwhelmed and underperformed here. I think they need to figure out how they can give Mike Smith as much game action as possible, because I just don't see Koskinen offering much the rest of the way. And look, it's not a surprise that after he signed his, his contract extension a couple of years ago, it was within days that the GM was let go.
You did what?
Exactly.
AJ, Mike Smith is 38 years old, and to say that the Oilers rely on a 38-year-old goalie who is not on the top of his game is a real telling sign here. Koskinen, a big question mark, as you indicated, but you kind of passed over the fact that Russell had the 3 assists. This is a third-pairing defenseman that led this team in scoring last week, while the likes of McDavid and Draisaitl, particularly in a 3-game set against the Maple Leafs, were completely MIA. I think between them, McDavid got no points, and Draisaitl got a second assist. Terrible stretch of games for the team, and it's no wonder that they were one of the more futile in terms of overall scoring that you covered earlier in the show over the past 7 days. On to the next club. We're talking about the Florida Panthers. They're one of the teams that has been consistently among the top performers in the league. They went 2-1-1. Keith Yandel reached a milestone of 1,000 games played in the league, and the last 890 have been consecutive for the league's current Iron Man. He's got the longest stretch of game action, consecutive game action in the entire NHL. And this is a guy at the beginning of the season that they were talking about maybe not playing regularly. So he's bucked that trend and continues to be a very good DFS play on a nightly basis behind a pretty good offense here in Florida. Consider that the likes of depth forwards, Achari with 3 goals, 1 assist, Vetrano 2 goals, 1 assist, Mason Marchment, former Leaf farmhand, with 2 goals, 1 assist. Boy, I hated to see this guy go, AJ. I thought that he could be a tough guy with good hands, and that's what he showed, at least last week. You can add almost Anthony Duclair almost to this list. If he's healthy, he's missed the last 4 games with an upper body hurt, but is traveling with the team and should challenge for top 6 minutes soon after he returns to this lineup. Heck, even Bobrovsky's been better of late, allowing only 13 goals against in his last 5 starts. So there's a lot of good news out of Florida right now.
All right, well, I'm gonna talk about that streak, and I know it's at the risk of jinxing Keith Yandel here, so I will send an apology if I do. But you look at it, he's just 24 games away from moving into the second for most consecutive games played. The lead is probably out of reach for, actually it is mathematically out of reach this season. So he would have to finish out this season and play into some of next season to catch Doug Jarvis, who played 964 consecutive games over his career. A couple other guys with current active streaks. You got Patrick Marleau at 877 and Phil the Thrill Kessel at 869. These guys are some of the toughest in the league, and it's fun to watch them go every night and see what they can do out there. Obviously Marleau maybe the least productive of those 3 at this point in his career, but certainly still grinding away. In Los Angeles, they continue to grind away games here, 1-1-1, which for the Kings I think is a pretty good record for the week when you consider 3 points out of 3 games. Big concern for them is the injury to Jonathan Quick, an upper body injury that kept him out of last night's game. They do have Cal Peterson, and they've been splitting time between the 2 of them, and that's been working out well for them overall. But it is a concern to me. That's a young netminder with limited NHL experience, and to have to throw him into the Wolves right away, playing more consistently every night, I'm not sure how well it'll work. In fact, if you look at his early February stretch where he made 5 straight appearances, he went 1-2-1 with a 2.56 goals against average. So I guess that's decent goals against average for this team, but not a lot of wins there, obviously. So something to watch if they switch to just riding him, if they use kind of, veteran journeyman Troy Grosnick in kind of a rotation, certainly something you're going to want to keep an eye on.
You know what? I call the rebuild that's going on here kind of Chicago light, with the number of youngsters that they've infused into this lineup over the last couple of years. And this season with some degree of success. I'm looking for big things from Andreas Athanasiou, AJ. He was injured earlier on, but he's back in the lineup getting a regular shift and suddenly has 5 points in his last 7 games played. This guy's an uber-skilled winger, and he brings a lot to this offense, and he's showing it right now. So a pretty good low-end DFS play if you're looking to fill out a roster. Over in Minnesota, this is another team that's been lighting it up with some youngsters leading the way, but it's the veterans that kind of contributed last week to lead this offense, despite a 1-2-1 record on the week. Marcus Foligno had a pretty nice time for himself, 3 goals and 3 assists, leading the offense. Greenway chipped in with 3 goals and 1 helper. On the back end, Jonas Brodin, 3 assists. That's 4 points in his last 6 games played for normally a defensive-type defenseman first. The Wild continue to hang in with the top teams in the Western Conference because of some of the performances that they're getting, including Koskinen and the Nets. 13 goals against in his last 7 game starts. He's actually outplaying Cam Talbot, who allowed 13 goals in his last 3 games by a wide margin in the Nets. So if you're looking for that rotation and who owns the net, it's the youngster over the veteran. Victor Rask up front has added 6 points in his last 5 games played, kind of like Nichushkin that I mentioned earlier. This guy's got all the tools. But that was a 5-game stretch that he went 6 points, and now he's been blanked again in the last 3 or 4 outings too. So up and down he goes. A guy that you're familiar with, Nick Bjugstad, may steal some of that ice time after producing 7 points in his last 7 games played overall. He's listed as the 3rd-line center, but I can see that changing if he continues the recent tear.
Well, I have to talk about last night's performance with Kaapo Kähkönen. We had 2 netminders going on an absolute tear heading into that game. You had Fleury on a 5-game winning streak, Kähkönen on a 6-game winning streak, and it was the youngster Kähkönen who came out on top with his first career shutout. So a solid outing by him. He continues to ride. I'm surprised they're continuing to split the workload. It's obviously a management thing in terms of making sure he's not too overwhelmed. But you're talking about a guy on a 7-game winning streak during which he's sporting a 1.42 goals against average. I think it's maybe time to take the training wheels off here, the Cam Talbot training wheels, and maybe give this guy a few more opportunities. In Montreal, a good week for them, 2-0-1 as they've had a bit of a resurgence here after the coaching change. Thomas Tatar, 5 assists, Jonathan Drouin, 3 helpers over that stretch. They're getting, decent net mining here from Carey Price along the way. Had a, 3 in his last 3 games, just 1 goal allowed in each of those. Obviously, that's a disappointment if you only give up 1 goal and suffer an overtime loss. Certainly not the outing they wanted. Maybe they used up all their scoring the game before when they shelled Winnipeg to the tune of 7-1. Weren't able to muster anything last night after that one.
Yeah, to me, the problem still is the lack of performance that they're getting out of the centerman. Suzuki cooled off big time after his early season start. Philip Deneau can't find the net. And Jesperi Kotkaniemi, hardly an offensive juggernaut himself. He's lucky right now, though. That's listed that he's getting to play with Toffoli and Anderson, probably the 2 of the 3 best wingers that are in the Canadiens' arsenal. So he has an opportunity here for big things with those large wingers on his flanks. So look out for that unit. Yoel Armia back and healthy on the wing with Suzuki. They're looking for some magic there. And of course, Jonathan Drouin, probably one of the bigger tickets on this roster, still not scoring consistently. So there are a lot of questions for me on this offense. And the Father Time continues to chip away at Shea Weber. He is hardly the scoring sensation among league defensemen that he was in earlier years. He's been limited to 1 assist in his last 7 games played, had 1 2-goal game, and then they went on another lengthy scoreless streak there too. So not getting a lot of offense out of a lot of key players on this team is really a telltale sign that challenges this team's offensive structure. The New Jersey Devils, here's another team that's challenged in terms of an offensive structure, but one bright light last week came from the net mining situation where Wedgwood turned in a 40-save shutout in Boston, of all places. A couple of youngsters here making the grade of late. Yegor Sharangovich in as left wing on the top line, has 3 points in his last 5 games played with added ice time. And Yanni Kokkonen getting a look at right wing on the top line. He's been blanked in his last 3 games played with his added playing opportunity. So just keep an eye on those 2 youngsters to see if they can make good on extended time there. Cal Palmieri is a guy who's been carrying a lot of the load offensively, but struggled this season, snapping an 8-game pointless drought last week. Finally, they need him to chip in regularly, and if they have any hope of keeping pace with goals against.
Well, I'm definitely concerned with New Jersey about the injury to Nico Hischier, a concussion, and he's considered week to week in the league's protocol. It's certainly a concern to see a player as young as he is having to deal with pretty significant concussion concerns here, and that's hopefully it won't. Hopefully he comes back fine, but you have to worry about the long-term impact of that one. In Nashville, they've got some of their guys have started picking it up a little bit despite a disappointing 1-3 week for the team. You got Philip Forsberg with 7 points in the last 4 games. Matthias Ekholm, 2 goals, 2 assists. But other than that, the net minding is the big concern here, in my opinion. Again, I get we harp on this a little bit, maybe a little bit too much for some of our listeners, but look, bad net minding will lose you games no matter how much offense you have going for you. Pekka Rinne got 4 opportunities to play last week, went 1-3 over that stretch with a .880 save percentage. So certainly not good enough from him. And UC Saros seeing pretty minimal work, which is surprising in that sense that they've kind of turned things over there. Obviously, he's got that injury, which is certainly a factor in that. So if he comes back, he'll probably take back over, but his numbers haven't been great on the year even prior to getting hurt.
AJ, over on the New York Islanders situation, this is another team that's hot. 4-0 last week, 5 straight wins overall. And look at this fourth line. I can't even call them a fourth line anymore when I see numbers like this. Cal Clutterbuck, 2 goals and 1 helper. Matt Martin, 2 goals and 2 assists, including 1 that he banked in off a goalie's head. I want to say more about that in a minute. Casey Cizikas with a goal and 3 assists. Jordan Eberle, a goal and 3 helpers. JP Pajot, 3 assists. You get the idea. The offense is clicking here when the bottom 6 is pouring it on like this. And in the nets, Sorokin is finding his groove. 2 wins and only 4 goals against. With the scoring lines humming as well and their attention to defensive detail in place, this is a team right now that nobody wants to play. Consider 3 straight wins over an awful Buffalo team by the same score, 5-2 each night. That was a bit of an oddity. But those 3 wins over the lowly Sabres isn't causing me to overrate the squad, is it, AJ? They mean business, and they're healthy right now. But before we go on, I got to have a rant here. I mentioned that shot by Martin. I don't know if you saw it, but he banked it in from almost the goal line off the goalie's head. How is that possible? Well, I'll tell you how. The goalie was in a deep crouch with this stupid positioning that I continue to see on an ongoing basis around the league. When goalies have a guy on a sharp angle below the face-off circle, there's absolutely no way goals should be scored. But they take up this stupid posture where they got a knee down and their head is under the crossbar. Of course, they're going to leave an opening there. And we saw it in Toronto on a recent game where Mike Hutchison plays the same way, and a shot goes over his shoulder and into the net from a sharp angle. These are team deflators. All you got to do, folks, this is Paul Bruno, the goalie coach, coming out now and saying, all you got to do is stand up, face your shooter on a good angle, and there's no way they can score. AJ, you're a hockey coach too. Please tell me that you're not coaching the goalies to kneel down in the nets at any point in time.
I'm just going to back away from this one, Paul, and just let you have the final word on the goalie positioning there. I'm certainly no goalie expert, that's for sure. In the Big Apple with the Rangers, a 3-1 week. Alexei Lafreniere, 2 goals, 1 assist. Philip Cheadle back in the lineup, 1 goal and 2 assists. Now that's not to mention some of their big name guys contributing as well. Pavel Buchnevich, 2 goals, 4 assists. Chris Kreider, 4 goals in the last 4 games. So they are getting offense. They're getting net minding here as well. I think this is a team that's going to be really dangerous to play. Shesterkin had 2 wins over that stretch, .947 save percentage, so a decent run of form for him. This is, you look at them in the rankings or in the standings rather, and you might consider them an easy out as especially when you consider Artemi Panarin is still away from the team. Shesterkin is dealing with a bit of a groin injury that caused him to miss the last 2 games, but they still have a decent netminder in Alexander Georgiev and even Keith Kincaid if they want to go that route. Seems the offense is still clicking without Panarin, so you add him back in at some point, and it's just that much harder of a team to beat, that's for sure.
You know what? And it helps them that their young rookie is finally starting to get along that learning curve. Alexis Lafreniere, you mentioned 3 points last week, playing first line minutes too. I think we're going to see the best of him over the next little while now that I think he's gotten over the stage fright of starting a season, maybe with all the hype around him. I think he's settling in, and we're starting to see the talent come out, and it's a pleasure to watch, I'll say that. The Ottawa Senators went 2-2, and I won't bash them like you did earlier in the show, making it seem like they're an easy out. This team has played a lot better of late, and this streak that they're on most recently hasn't seen them lose too many in a row. And so I take a bit of an issue with the way you panned them earlier on. I'll say that, coming to the defense of Ottawa Senators fans. It's not something I do on a regular basis, but I will in this instance. Drake Batherson is a guy that they touted as one of their up-and-coming scorers a few weeks ago, and we've seen that consistently. I think we've mentioned his name in each of the last 4 weeks in terms of scoring production. 2 goals and 1 helper again last week. Colin White chipped in with a couple of goals. Artem Anisimov with a couple of goals. Even Ryan Zingle, who was recently rejoined this team for his second tour of duty in the Canadian nation's capital with 2 goals. I have a lot of time for this guy as a steady goal scorer, and we're starting to see that. Wonder if he can keep it up long term, but he's going to get top 6 minutes in the near term to really boost his morale and this offense for what it's worth. Backup goalie Hogberg is out with a lower body injury, and that means he could be available sometime in the next week. But in the interim, Murray has been forced to play every game, and he's been pulled in 2 of his last 4 starts. So some real serious goalie concerns here, despite the fact they're scoring a lot. They're giving up a lot in the nets as well. Thomas Chabot on the back end, though, is a guy that kind of has overcome concerns from the rest of the roster, and he's back among the scoring leaders in the defensemen in the NHL after a slide last season. He's back in good form and playing almost half a game every night out. Nick Paul is going to lose some time at left wing on the top scoring line. 1 goal in his last 22 games played. I think Ryan Zingle's the top candidate to get that spot going forward.
Well, I'll issue kind of a word of caution on Drake Batherson. To start the year, he had 1 goal in his first 16 games. Then, of course, he goes on this tremendous tear. No doubt about it. 8 goals in 8 games. One double in there too. But he's back on the cold streak right now. He's goalless in his last 4 games with just 1 assist over that stretch. So I think there's maybe a little pump the brakes there in terms of utilizing him. We saw an extended slump to start the season. Maybe wait until he gets 1 more to put him into your DFS lineups to start a new streak rolling there for him. One team that could certainly use somebody contributing a streak is the Philadelphia Flyers, who fortunately went 1-3 last week. That included 2 losses to the Penguins. Good news for me. It's some of the same old story that we talked about earlier in the year when they were having troubles. You look at Jacob Voracek, no goals in 4 games, 2 assists in there, certainly better than nothing. But they got 1 assist from Ivan Provorov, 1 assist from James Van Riemsdyk. Yes, they got production out of Travis Konechny, 4 points over that stretch. But honestly, even bigger concern than that is the goaltending. Neither netminder having a good week. Carter Hart went 0-2 with a .852 save percentage. Meanwhile, Brian Elliott goes 1-1 with .875 save percentage. So no goaltending, no offense. And this is a tough division. There's a reason that a simple bad week like that, in most seasons, not a big deal. You can turn it around, you can recover. And I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom now, but they were previously, we were talking about them being number 2 right behind Boston. Suddenly they're sitting at 5 in the standings in the East, and that's out on the outside looking in. So there are no time for weeks off, that's for sure.
And we get to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. I go first, AJ, but I'll give you the floor in a second. I know you're chomping at the bit, champing at the bit, rather. The Pittsburgh Penguins went 3-1 last week. Kasperi Kapanen is a guy that I kind of ripped a week ago, and boy, did he answer in typical fashion. 3 goals and 3 assists for a red hot week for him, but I still think he's a teaser, AJ, and you can rebut when you get the floor. Jared McCann is a guy I have more faith in on a regular basis when he's in the lineup. 2 goals and 2 helpers for a guy who can move up and down this roster, and he has in the last few years. Same with Zach Aston Reese, 2 goals on his ledger. But Rust is a guy I want to talk about a little bit, AJ. He's moved into the right wing, top spot on the right wing. That means playing time with Sidney Crosby, with 3 points in his last 4 games played. I look at this guy's shots on goal rate, and it's better than 3 a game on the season. That's phenomenal. And as long as he's with Sid the Kid, he's going to continue to get opportunities going forward. But that means that Kapanen has been moved to a second scoring line with Evgeny Malkin. It's not like going from the penthouse to the outhouse at all by any means. But I just thought it was an interesting move to see that switch up. And after coming back into the line with 5 points in his last 6 games played, though, McCann is again sidelined with an upper body injury, and that's a shame. This guy just can't stay healthy, it seems, of late. On the back end, a note that I think you have more insight on, and that's Dumoulin coming back into the lineup, and he moves right in playing time alongside Chris Letang, and it could further boost the club's key offensive defenseman, who is once again among the top scorers at his position.
Well, yeah, you absolutely, that is the biggest aspect that most people will see about Brian Dumoulin's game. It's his ability to free up Chris Letang, and ultimately that is one of his bigger assets. But one thing that's undersold on Brian Dumoulin's ability is to get the puck up the ice and transition from defense to offense. If you watched that Sidney Crosby goal where he split the defenseman, flicked it over the goaltender, really a beautiful goal. That pass was made by Brian Dumoulin. He's the one that sprung Crosby to go on that. And look, the best thing that they could do to capitalize on his ability there is try and get that pairing out there as much as they can with Kasperi Kapanen, because that is a guy that is speedy, that knows what to do when he's on a breakaway, and that's why he's so streaky. You know, Paul, you know this as well as I do, but with his speed, if he can get breakaways and stuff like that, he'll score more often than not coming down, 1-on-0 or 1-on-1 even. But, you don't get those every single night. And so it's why he tends to be a bit of a streaky player. I was wondering if you were going to talk about him, eat a little crow on that one, Paul, for your, panning of him last week. The McCann injury is a big concern, though. You go from start of the season, you've got Jason Zucker in that spot. He gets hurt, but you get Jared McCann back right away. So he fills in. Now you're looking at who goes into the top 6. Here's some potential candidates for the top 6 here. Brandon Tanev, Evan Rodriguez, maybe Zach Aston Reese. These aren't names that you normally throw out when you're talking about top 6 on a team.
No.
And so without McCann, that's certainly going to be a big concern. I'll wrap it up there and go talk about the San Jose Sharks, who went 1-2-1 last week. Look, it's so hard to talk about this team with anything other than net-minding concerns because, Devin Dubnyk gets an, OT winner last night. This was the guy's second win of the season in 12 appearances. From a 40-win guy one year in Minnesota, most of his seasons in Minnesota, with the exception of the last one, were 30-win campaigns. Like, this is a guy normally just winning a bunch. And he goes to San Jose and just can't do anything in terms of a win. I don't know if it's the goaltending coaching there or what. I mean, even you look on paper, like the defense in front of him is Mario Ferraro with Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson, Simic and Vlasic as a shutdown kind of third pairing. Like, there's no reason that these goaltenders should be doing this badly in San Jose. Obviously, their other big concern up front is the fact that Timo Meier and Thomas Hertl both dealing with injuries. That's really going to stretch their top 6. Again, you talk about names you don't normally see in the top 6. They've got Matt Nieto filling a top 6 role for him. I think that could be the first time in his career he's played top 6 minutes. He's more of a bottom 6 plugger in my opinion.
Yeah, and number 2 center with no goals on the season right now, Dylan Gambrell. That just tells you all you need to know. You want to say something nice about San Jose? I can. It's just a personal note, though, and that is that Mario Ferraro is a cousin of one of my son's best friends. There, that's a nice little note if you want, but it doesn't have anything to do with DFS value or scoring value or anything positive to say about the trajectory of this team. It's a real struggle for the Sharks right now, as you mentioned.
I'm sure the weather in San Jose is totally fine. That's something else nice we can say about San Jose. I'm sure it's sunny and nice.
That's AJ Scholes 24. For those of you that want to send your notes from San Jose to my co-host, a lovely city, I'm sure. I have never been, but I've been nearby. There's a St. Bruno up there, actually. A friend of mine told me, and I had to go visit that the last time I was out there too. So kind of cool that their former mayor came to visit once a couple of years ago. The St. Louis Blues went 3-0-1 last week. This is a perennial cup contender, and they're looking like it right now. And it's support scoring as well as solid goaltending that is normally the recipe. But last week, really, they did it with an overall contribution. Zach Sanford leading the offense with 3 goals and 1 helper. I also note, though, that Jordan Binnington stumbled with a pair of 4 goals against outings in his last 3 starts overall. So some unsettling signs as well, but they're plugging through. Jordan Kyrou has slowed down a little bit in terms of his scoring pace in a top 6 role, only 3 points in his last 7 games played. He's not going to lose playing time there, though, with Schwartz still out of the lineup and expected to miss at least another week. But it's on the back end that they got some tough news. They've been missing Colton Parayko in the last 9 games with a back injury, and I'm told most recently now that it could require surgery, and that might mean the end of his season. But on the flip side, his long-term IR status has paved the way for a shocking return of Vlad Tarasenko to make a surprise return. I wasn't expecting to see this guy until the playoffs, AJ. They made that comment clear because they couldn't fit his salary cap into the club situation. But now that Parayko's out, they have that flexibility, and they took advantage of it. The Russian tank made his first appearance last game, 4 shots on goal in that outing. I expect him to be a frontline player for this team. Obviously, as soon as he gets untracked, you'll see the numbers start to go there, and that's a big boon to the offense. But boy, they're missing Parayko on the back end, and that's a tough blow there. So it's give with one hand and take with the other.
Yeah, that's certainly a concern. I mean, you talk about the list of injuries. Some of it is more depth guys, but Tyler Bozak, Robert Thomas, Oscar Sundqvist, even Jacob De La Rose, in addition to Schwartz and Barbashev being out. Like there's a ton of injuries on this team, and that's why you're getting guys like Jordan Kyrou opportunities to play in the top 6. And to your point, there's no one really to challenge him there. What you can put Nathan Walker, Kyle Clifford in a top, first line role? I don't think so at this point. And you mentioned Binnington's struggles. Fortunately for them, they had some decent outings from Ville Husso to kind of step in and maybe give Binnington an opportunity. Including last night's game, 3-0-1 in Husso's last 4 contests. The goals against average a little bit high at 3.16, but basically he's just keeping them in games and letting them win. And you add Tarasenko back to that, you can do even more of that when you have that guy. In Tampa, look, it just doesn't stop. 3-0-1, Killorn, 3 goals, 2 assists, Yanni Gourde, 3 goals, 3 assists. And, really just, I don't know what you do against this juggernaut right now. Offense is clicking. Gourde, Killorn, Palat had 5 points last week. Hedman had 5 points, so you're getting production from the back end as well. These guys are producing on the power play, so certainly don't take any penalties against Tampa. That's not going to work out well for you. And then, they've got the, I'll say arguably just to hedge my bet, but I really shouldn't. You know what? I'm not going to. They have the best netminder in the league, and Andrei Vasilevsky. That overtime loss that I mentioned came at the hands of Curtis McElhinney. Vasilevsky won all 3 of his appearances, .944 save percentage. I don't know how you stop this team. And, by the way, all things continue to point to the fact that once we get into the playoffs, they're going to get a little-known player named, let me check, Nikita Kucherov back in the lineup for the playoffs. The team is unstoppable now, and you're going to add that guy back in. It's insane. I don't know who's going to stop them.
Yeah, and just for fun, they're switching things up offensively just to keep it interesting for followers of the club. Anthony Cirelli was their second-line center much of the season, but most recently we show him playing right wing on the top line with Point and Palat, stretching out the roster. That has a little bit to do with the shakeup at center. Yanni Gourde and Tyler Johnson taking up a couple of spots there. I don't see Braden Point anywhere, AJ. So, he's listed at the number 1 center, I should say. So, Ugord and Johnson playing second and third line center roles. They've done it before, but I think it's an interesting thing to see Cirelli on the flank on the top unit there, maybe giving some defensive support to guys that play more a one-way game and Point and Palat, if you will. Though I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing their defensive exploits. I just think that Cirelli insulates them that much more. The Maple Leafs went. Sorry.
I was going to just add, Paul, it's almost like John Cooper is just switching up lines just to see what happens. Like, hey, if an injury came up, like, could Cirelli play on the wing? Sure. Could Tyler Johnson move to center? Like, it's like he's experimenting just in case to have, like, backup plans. And
don't you think the guy must feel like a bit of a mad scientist back there? Put this guy there, put that guy there. It's all fun and games. We're winning every night. Blah, blah, blah. And the Leafs, talk about winning every night. I mean, they went 2-2 last week, and I felt like it was a big losing week. So they came out of Edmonton after crushing the hopes of the Oilers with 3 straight wins, but then they came back down to earth with 2 subpar efforts against the lowly Vancouver Canucks. So way up and then way down was the nature of my week of fandom for my favorite team. But interesting notes there. Bottom 6 performers, Jimmy Vesey with 3 goals, and Jason Spezza with 4 assists led this offense. And on the downside, Austin Matthews still looks a little bit limited by a nagging wrist injury. He admits as much, and you wonder if he might benefit from more downtime, although it's not looking like he's going to take some. They got a critical 3-game set against Winnipeg coming up this week, and they need all hands on deck to kind of do what they've done all season long, and that's knock down pretenders when they have head-to-head matchups over multiple games, but then they've done it before, and I hope they do it again. On the further on the plus side, John Tavares is looking like his old self of late, chipping in with regular offense from the second line position. He was going through a bit of a scoring slide, but that's a thing of the past. And Zach Hyman is thriving on the third line. This guy has helped every unit that he's been on in the last few years, and it's no surprise that he's doing the same thing in a third line role with a couple of youngsters there that are making life miserable for opponents night in and night out. I'm talking about Ilya Mikheyev and Pierre Engvall, who have just been fantastic in terms of the way they skate and get in the way of the flow of the game for the opposition. It's a prototypical third line unit that's really a disrupting force behind 2 solid offensive lines. I haven't got much to complain about, have I?
No, and I mean, you could get some help here for a bottom 6 that doesn't really need it, or even top 6 in Wayne Simmons. The cast is off the wrist. He's skating, and now from all accounts, it's just a matter of getting the conditioning up for him. And so that's good news for the Leafs, absolutely. In Vancouver, you mentioned they had some good games against the Maple Leafs. They went 3-1 last week. Nils Höglander picking up 2 goals for Tannen with 2 goals as well. And look, they managed to do it without Elias Pettersson for a number of games here. He's missed the last 3 contests, including last night's outing. A good run of form for him too. Right before that injury, his previous 5 games, he had 3 multi-point efforts over that stretch, to give him 5 goals and 2 assists in his last 5 contests. So getting him back sooner rather than later is going to help this team that seems to be finding its groove. Now, a look at the standings, you have to wonder, is it a little bit too little too late in terms of tracking down a top 4 spot? They are still only 4 points back from Montreal, but Montreal has 5 games in hand on them. So I do think there's plenty of action left, but it may be too little too late to try and recover here for the Canucks.
Yeah, but they can at least point to the fact that they're getting scoring finally from top sources that have been dry for the last little while. Bo Horvat, Jake Virtanen, Tyler Pearson, Brock Besser, all picking up the slack after some downtimes in the last couple of weeks, and it's made quite an interesting turn of fortune when you consider they're missing their best player in the last 3 games and they won them all. They have to feel good about that aspect. In Las Vegas, the Vegas Golden Knights went 4-0. That's 6 straight wins overall. They're kind of like Tampa. You got to nitpick to really find something wrong here. But I'll talk about something right. Alex Tuch is a third-line winger on this team in name only. 5 goals and 1 assist last week, earning a spike in his normal playing time. I wonder if he'll actually get a regular turn with one of the top centers on this team going forward. And those centers include Chandler Stevenson, 2 goals, 3 assists last week to continue his rise from from a person that we didn't really factor into the DFS value here in terms of really good DFS value now, still underpriced in my opinion more nights than not. And on defense, even youngster Nicholas Haag with a goal and 2 assists chipping in from the back end of late. Mark Stone had 10 points in his last 4 games before being nicked up in his last outing, so keep an eye on his status going forward. Second liners, Marchessault and Carlson, haven't been mentioned too much in our pods this season, but their production has been steady for their profiles. It's Riley Smith, the right winger on the second line, that's a bit of a concern, though. A bit off his normal offensive pace with only 9 points in 21 games played. That's the only nit that I will pick on the Knights roster.
Well, yeah, for me, it mostly comes down to injury concerns. You know, you mentioned Mark Stone, Alex Pietrangelo, both of those guys missed out last night in that game, and consequently, they lost for the first time in 7 games. Now, some people will look at the fact that they placed Robin Lehner on IR yesterday as a concern, but because they can use retroactive IR, that really doesn't affect his return date since he's been out as long as he has. So really, I think it was more the fact that they needed to make some roster shuffling to accommodate for the fact that Stone and Pietrangelo were out last night. So don't read anything into that moving forward. I think the one thing you should read into in terms of the net mining is the solid continued play of Marc-Andre Fleury. He only gave up 1 goal in that game last night. The other goal for Minnesota was an empty netter. So he continues to perform well, and that's going to make it hard to get Robin Lehner back in the lineup, in my opinion. Although, as I've noted before, it seems like Pete DeBoer is anything but a Marc-Andre Fleury fan. In Washington, you've got some decent net mining as they went 2-1 in the last week. A win from Ilya Samsonov in his lone appearance. 1 win, 1 loss from Vitek Vanacek. For him, this is a team we talked about. They'll be without Tom Wilson for a number of games here. 7 was the suspension, so they'll have to figure out how to shuffle the deck here. Looks like most likely we'll see a guy like Daniel Sprong or even perhaps Richard Panik slide into a top 6 role. They've also used Connor Sherry periodically in top 6 opportunities as well. But other than that, this is a team that's fully healthy and fully ready to go. Oshie leading the way in points last week with 3 assists, which isn't really his game. If I think of TJ Oshie, I think of a goal scorer, not really a playmaker. No goals over that stretch, but is figuring out a way to contribute. And that's all you can really ask for. If there's a concern here that you have to pinpoint, it's maybe the fact that Alexander Ovechkin had just 1 goal in those 3 games. But this is not a guy that you want to bank on slumping for any extended period. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'll say Panik is the guy that I would venture to slot in as that second line scorer. They've kept him around as a depth scoring insurance, and he's done it in the past. I think I'd take the veteran over the youngster Sprong in that instance if you're looking to bank on somebody available in your free agent pools in your season-long hockey. So that's a tip that I will put out there. The Winnipeg Jets, as I mentioned, they're heading to Toronto for 3 games against the division-leading Leafs. This is the second-best team in the North Division for my money. They went 2-2 last week, led on offense by Perreault with 3 goals and Stastny with 3 goals. But I'm curious to see why Stastny is playing wing on the top line. They did this with Pierre-Luc Dubois when he first came over. I thought this was going to be a 3-headed monster at the center ice position, but they're using 2 centers on the top line for the time being. I thought they'd stretch their roster with the luxury that they have. When I list the 3 pivots that they have on their roster at 1, 2, 3. I don't think there's a team in this division that can match them in terms of depth and quality there. So I wonder if this is another short-term experiment before they finally settle on the conventional route that I'm suggesting here. Andrew Kopp has been productive as a top 6 winger earlier in the season, but he's been a casualty of this offensive shakeup, and his offensive slump has prompted his return to the third line where he's been more accustomed to being. A heavy workload in this condensed schedule is reflected in the recent struggles of one Connor Hellebuck, AJ, who's allowed at least 3 goals against in his last 7 starts. That's something we're not used to seeing in terms of what we usually get out of the Winnipeg goalie. Are you at all concerned?
It's definitely a concern. I mean, you talk about, I think he had one game in there against Montreal in which he gave up just one goal, but
Right.
seven of his last 8 starts, 3 or
That's
more
what
goals.
I meant. Yeah.
I guess the one, kind of silver lining there is over that stretch, he still went 5-3. So the offense able to bail him out a little bit. I totally agree with your concern about this roster shuffle. I think, to me, what it indicates is that this team probably will consider, try, and find a top 6 winger heading into the deadline, because obviously they feel like they don't have other options here to move into top 6, whether it be Andrew Kopp, Matthew Perreault, Mason Appleton. There's clearly no trust there, because I agree. If I was building these lines, I'd probably do something like, Scheifele and Wheeler on one line with a body on the other side. Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois, same. Put a body on the other side. And then Paul Stastny and Nikolai Ehlers as the third line, which I think would be really hard to match up with. But they obviously have concerns about plugging in the one guy in kind of each of those spots. So I expect them to maybe look at a top 6 winger if available when the deadline comes up.
And AJ, it's a good way to tease the fact that in the next few weeks we're approaching the trade deadline, and we'll have more rumors that we can throw out, and also suggestions about what other teams are looking for to augment their rosters as they make that playoff push that we're headed for. One of the more exciting times in our calendar. Well, that wraps up the portion of our look around the league, AJ, and we thank our listeners for tuning in to PuckCast with Statsman and AJ, RotoWire's signature fantasy hockey podcast with the support of our sponsor, Owner's Box. Please remember to send your comments or questions on Twitter. Follow me, Paul Bruno, at Statsman22, and you can follow AJ at AJ Shoals24. Don't forget, you can watch this pod on YouTube on RotoWire at RotoWire Hockey. As always, we invite you to listen in to PuckCast to get our tips to stay out of the competition in your fantasy hockey planning and research. Stay tuned for our DFS segment. We've been winning a lot of people a lot of money in this last few weeks, and why don't you join in on the fun? So hang in there. We'll be back with you shortly.
Please like our video and subscribe to RotoWire. Then go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.